Hi, we're 2 minutes past, and it looks like it's slowing down a little bit. So we'll certainly welcome the new people as they join. But I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today. Azul Partners and Vroozi giving a webinar on debunking the buzz. We're taking procurement, talking about procurement agility today with Jason and Joe Fox, and very glad to be joining the stage with both of you. I've been in the procurement space for about 20-something years, and I think every time I talk to you, I always learn something. So certainly a great opportunity for this audience to learn. What we want to do is have some opening remarks in the beginning. So what I'll do is I'll open things up, but I want to encourage you to ask questions. Please take advantage of who we have on the panel. Take advantage of this conversation. Learn about digital in procurement and finance, and make sure you get your questions. So to do that, I have the Q&A panel open on some screens off to the side here. So for me to get your question, just add it to the Q&A panel, and I'll make sure that we get those questions addressed. I also have some from the registration, so thank you to those who did submit questions in advance. We'll get to those shortly. But let me first get introductions of me first. I'll be moderating today. My name is Mike Judd, and I'm Senior Director of Product Marketing at Vroozi. Like I mentioned, I had a long history in procurement solution space, enterprise level, and definitely mid-size market as well. So I'll be moderating today, and first I'll turn it over to Jason to give his introduction.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mike. It is great to be here today. In terms of my background and what I plan to speak on, there is so much going on right now within procurement in terms of priorities. My original introduction to this profession was almost as an economist, looking at it and looking from the outside in at how technology could influence it. And today we really just have the perfect storm of so many factors where technology can help. If we think about what's going on in commodity markets, if we think about what's going on with inflation generally, if we think about automation and digitization, it's super exciting. And for me, having been in this space for close to 25 years now, gosh, I think it is 25 years, living in 2021 as a procurement technology enthusiast and speaking on it is just the perfect culmination of my career so far. It's super exciting to see the interest and excitement in what we do at Spend Matters and what Vroozi does, given the need today. So I'll leave it at that for now, but super excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. And Joe.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate being here. And Jason, always great to have a fireside chat with you. As far as my background goes, about 20 years in procurement, really focused on the value of procurement and the full value of procure-to-pay digital. I come from the product angle. And so you'll hear me talking about how software can be delivered in order to drive adoption. And really, if you look at the CPO survey we're going to cover, you'll see some of the common challenges for digital and how I'm going to cover how you can solve that with the right product solution. So really a pleasure to be here, Mike, and back to you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you both. So this is what we're going to cover today. I'll go through that survey Joe was just talking about. So that's the survey said. Jason will talk a little bit about the state of procurement and finance, just some great things on trends and what he was just talking about. And then we'll talk about a connected procure-to-pay digital journey. Joe provide some comments on that. And then that's going to go relatively quickly where we want to really open it up to you. So this is where we need you to feed the Q&A. I don't think we're going to have you open mic, so it's going to be really dependent on the Q&A chat. So make sure you get those as we go. So any thoughts that come to mind as we talk, go ahead and enter those in. And the last point, we'll just get you started, get you going on some resources. So just to kick things off from my end, from a moderator point of view, I want to talk about what prompted this webinar. And it was the CPO survey. So, we've talked about how long we've been around, and it was interesting that now driving operational efficiency dethroned reducing costs. So if you've been around for as long as we have, you always heard about, I want to reduce and manage costs. So now the change of time is really about operational efficiency. And I really like the wording here, operational efficiency over process efficiency. I've seen a lot of people focus on process. And if we make things go faster, oftentimes what we do is we line things up behind a bottleneck, right? So operational to me means it's more of a system efficiency. where we want to measure outcomes. And this operation needs to function under stress. We certainly saw that last year, right? So you want to make sure you're efficient under pressure as well. So when we speak today, we're going to speak about agility, right? And that means enabling your operation to succeed and still function, do its outcomes, achieve its outcomes when there's change and when there's stress to the business. So certainly mitigating risk from an operational risk perspective is certainly a big part of agility and digital. And by the way, you will get cost savings too. So obviously it's still number two, still important. But by focusing on operational efficiency and the outcomes, you're going to see reductions in costs. And I think that's really where the third part comes in about digital transformation. We do recognize that digital is very important for us to achieve the top two things there. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. How do we become more digital and more agile? But obviously with the next part of the survey, there's things that are challenging us. And in fact, quality of data and poor integration are pretty key elements in terms of being digital and agile. So I just want to quickly paint a picture of what digital looks like. We all know it. So I'm going to use an example of when I was on an airplane. We backed out of the gate, we're sitting on the tarmac, the pilot does the checks, and lo and behold, the elevator, which gets the plane up high, wasn't functioning. So we're back to the gate, and what really impressed me there was the pilot got on the intercom and said, well, you know as much as I know because I'm using the same app that we're going to be delayed for 2 hours, right? So long story short, we were delayed. I wasn't going to make my connection, so they routed me, the airline routed me on another flight, which is 2 gates down. So I had in my hand the new ticket for the new gate, the new flight. So I was under the face of the stress and change. I was already on my way on. I had a plane ticket to the other plane ticket on the other plane, and I had a little time too. I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm watching all the people at the counter who had boarding passes of paper and scanned paper. So those that even thought they were electronic because they scanned their boarding pass still had to sit in line because that boarding pass, that scan was no good anymore. So that's really what I want to talk about today in terms of digital. It really means working with live data. So as events change, the data changes, right? The mechanic had to communicate to the airline that this is a no-go, start routing people to another situation, another itinerary. So it's being connected, right? And it's having that live data and experience. So when we talk about digital agility, and this is the last thought I'll leave you with, and please again ask questions and provide your comments, that what we want to talk today about is a digital experience for people. We all know it in our personal lives. We're connected in real time. It's convenient that we at the palm of our hand on a device, we could connect to the world and move the physical world. I could get pizzas to my doorstep. I could get a car to take me to the airport because there's a driver a mile away willing to take me there. So super convenient. And in context means that whatever need I have, I could identify the right person in my network that's going to help me out. So I can find that driver who's a mile away that wants to give me a ride to the airport. So we talk about that as the digital experience, and that's what we want to provide to procurement and finance. So I'll let Jason take it over at this point, and we'll start introducing that concept into procurement and finance. So thank you, Jason.
Absolutely. Again, it's great to be here. And one thing I really want to get at and talk about today in this section, but then hopefully with the questions you toss at Joe and I, is that a lot of this can sound jargonish. There can be a lot of cliche around digital and agile. Before I got into procurement tech, I in college was an English major, believe it or not, and I just have a natural aversion to buzzwords. But this stuff is real, and I don't necessarily have better language to describe it. So even if you're on the fence of, oh, we need a digital transformation, or we're in the midst of one, what is that? And you think about it in Dilbert terms, it's real, and there is so much happening right now in terms of adoption in bigger organizations, and now it's cascading into the middle market as well. But if we look at what procurement and finance people are truly living right now in their day-to-day lives, you know, remote work is real. You know, to personalize this webinar a bit, I will say that I'm actually not working remotely. You can probably see Michigan Avenue in Chicago here, and I think we have about probably 30% of our company in the office today, which is great. But most of us are working remotely all the time. And that poses very unique problems when we're dealing with suppliers, whether we have to talk with them, meet with them, meet with our colleagues that work that used to happen informally in the hallway, asking about a supplier, asking about, hey, you know, and I could pick on our controller, Melissa, is that supplier onboarded yet? You know, I really need to work with them. That's gone away. You know, we now need to do everything remotely, or assume things are going to be remote. Even if, you know, as we all hope, we all come back to work, how we come back to work is not going to be the same. There have been some great articles in The Economist in the past few months about remote work. And in a lot of companies, we're going to see people come back 2 or 3 days a week when the pandemic is, you know, in control or over. The notion of a 4 or 5 day work week in the office is not going to be the same, even if we rid ourselves of this horrible virus in the world. So remote work is here to stay. Digital acceleration, absolutely the case as well. The speed of business, the speed of needing to make decisions today, the speed of needing to be flexible with a supply base and onboard new suppliers as needed because we can't keep a production line open. Or, you know, even if we jokingly say, you know, a supplier is a restaurant or food provider. I went to Starbucks this morning and I couldn't get the drink I wanted because of a supply shortage. I mean, craziness, right? Whether it's resin, plastic, MRO, IT, or a latte, this notion of acceleration is all too real in today's environment. And that ties into uncertainty too. Uncertainty is very much there, but I'd rather be in procurement than be in finance today. So, you know, I count my blessings there, but finance really needs to think about, you know, how do we look at working capital? How do we look at balance sheets today? You know, we have a boom, but a boom could go to bust if there's inflation or stagflation that continues. The ECB and the Fed, who control monetary policy in Europe and the US, are in a tremendous position of power right now. And it's scary if we look at inflation, and they have to control it. If we don't get that under control, we could have, you know, a late 70s, 80s situation in the US or a Japan situation. So from a finance perspective, there's so much to think about with working capital and payment terms and risk and the like. Obviously, that ties to the next point, which is risk. We have so many forms of risk today. We really, for the first time ever, have seen suppliers declaring force majeure on a regular basis over contracts in different industries, based on what's happened in the world environment. And part of that is tied to bullwhips. Anybody who informally or formally took a supply chain management course in university or grad school, you know, might have played the beer game, which is great. If you have it, I would recommend you Google it. But we're basically living that. And the notion of the beer game is you have, you know, a thirsty bunch of college students, you know, who want to make sure they have beer for their party. But how they get that, it's got to go through a retailer, a distributor, or a wholesaler, and to the plant. And whisper down the lane in terms of needing something takes time. And if you have one small thing that throws that off, like let's say a ship captain makes a mistake and runs aground in the Suez Canal, that can, you know, literally have huge ramifications and drive the bullwhip effect based on orders across the globe. So nobody really knows what they're doing right now. I find, even though I'm somewhat of a seasoned person looking at procurement, the older I get and the more time I spend in this environment, the less I know. It's kind of scary, but that's how I feel seeing what's going on today. It's so hard to be proactive for all of us when we have to react. And human interaction, or really a lack of it, has created a whole set of challenges. You know, we can do great things via Zoom. I mean, we were so lucky to have this pandemic hit, if we can call it lucky, in a Zoom environment, but that has limitations. Next slide, please.
Yeah, sure.
So what are procurement people sweating right now? You know, savings or reductions is probably number one, right? Savings are hard to come by today, but at least we want to beat the market and get supply. We need to think about redesigning our supply chains. You know, if you're in any industry involving the use of chips right now, not just high-tech manufacturing, but automotive, industrial companies, you need to think about over the next 5 or 10 years how we get supply. China's making major moves to you know, consolidate control over the chip market, though it's still largely in Taiwan. If you're a North American or European company, we need to think about localization and investment and hedging our bets. Eliminating non-value added jobs is also huge. It used to be, we talked about if we were a mature procurement organization moving to a center of excellence model where, we had smart, great resources in a lower cost region who probably spoke better English than we did. Now, let's get rid of those resources if we don't need them through automation. If we can drive workflow in the procure to pay process, and the equivalent of straight through processing, regardless of whether it's an invoice or not, we can truly eliminate non-value added positions. I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but the fewer touch points we have, the more likely things are to work smoothly. Supplier, supply, and supply chain risk, all different, right? But they all come together, whether it's an overall supply market, whether it's one supplier, whether it's, to the previous point of supply chain design. There are so many elements of risk right now we have to consider. Contract risk, as I referenced before, also being one. Outtasking. We're getting smarter and smarter in procurement at how we outtask. And we don't necessarily just outtask low value activities. We work with market intelligence providers. There are some great ones in India. There are some great providers which provide reports, but those PowerPoints we used to do on supply markets for strategic categories for our management are now things we can pull from experts who can help us. How can we outtask small things? So the notion of just dealing with big suppliers, we're not just going to hire a big five firm anymore, though likely we are for certain things, but we have these small projects where we use either smaller suppliers, gig economy workers, and others from an outtasking perspective. And then we'd be remiss if we didn't note that diversity in North America is huge right now. And this is an apolitical issue. It has nothing to do with politics. We all want more diverse supply chains. If we think about the innovation that's been lost in this world because we didn't encourage diversity in the past, it's unfathomable. I mean, I'm a strong supporter of Western democracy, and I want to encourage entrepreneurs of all types, colors, races, genders, because if we have innovative new suppliers who can get a step forward, we're going to be more resilient as procurement and more resilient as nations if we can focus on that. Next slide.
Sure.
So I apologize. I often get teased by Joe and others, and certainly those I work with on a daily basis, of going to 8-point font. And I'm trying to get cured of that as I get older, and I can't even read it myself anymore on the screen. But this is a chart we created with the help of a couple of analysts on the Spend Matters team to really distill down procurement maturity levels. And most procurement organizations are operating in what we would describe as a core procurement mindset. And some of you in procurement might chuckle at this, but when I first started doing sourcing, these are some of the things we looked at, right? So if a CFO, a head of IT, a senior executive in a company wanted something, we jump, right? So we would absolutely jump and hold their hands. We also obviously are transactional. We have to get things done for the business. I hate the phrase PO pusher, but we still have to do that. Accounts payable is incredibly busy just trying to onboard suppliers and catch up with procurement. Suppliers want to know where my money is, and procurement often is the one who has to respond. A lot of organizations at the core procurement level of maturity are still involved in basic negotiations of all sorts, whether that's done with an RFX tool or whether it's done manually. Inventory management, probably the understated critical aspect of procurement that isn't talked about. We don't just buy from suppliers. We also need to know where things are that we bought are in the past physically, or where are they on the way to our facilities. And then contracting. Contracting in and of itself is a huge function, not just within legal, but as you get more mature, a contract center of excellence, within a company, or a contract management function. So most procurement orgs are in this kind of, I would say, area of core procurement, say 60 to 80%, depending on region. As we get a bit more sophisticated, though, we begin to see things like a true CPO. And one thing I look at to gauge whether the title matters or not, VP CPO, is how much someone is compensated, right? If there is a VP or CPO and she's compensated at the same level of other executives, that tells me that organization cares a lot about procurement, as they should. But we begin to see that as we mature. We see, ownership of the source to pay process and strategic sourcing overall, including the technology to enable it as organizations gain maturity. We see commodity management functions in manufacturing and performance and vendor management in core procurement and IT. We see procurement partner with the business around specialized categories for legal spend, for field services, for capital equipment, for leasing. We see risk rising up. All those things signal to me an organization which is gaining maturity. And then finally, the creme de la creme, the top 5% or 10%, maybe based on region, of procurement organizations who are super sophisticated really begin to think of how do they structure the function more effectively? How do they have centers of excellence? How do they have dedicated risk teams and truly dedicated teams on topics such as diversity? Not just, Joe, Sheena, or Jason in the basement trying to enable diversity, but how does that cascade across the broader business? How do we merge procurement and supply chain and manufacturing to think holistically? How do we support design engineering and global trade functions? Those are what the more mature, the most mature procurement organizations are truly thinking about today. And, as you think about your own journey, there's some great benchmarks you can use to get there. I've always been a fan of Hackett, but there's lots of others who have literally benchmarks and KPIs who will help you think through how to get to a different level and set of capabilities. At Spend Matters, we have our own maturity models mapped to technology adoption and usage. So there are clear paths to becoming more mature. And as the Spend Matters Deloitte CPO survey data shows, those organizations which are more mature, it wasn't in the previous slides, but it's in the study, clearly perform better overall. And tech and digital is so front and center in the adoption and move to becoming more sophisticated and giving better returns. So with that, I think that probably closes out my slides, but really looking forward to the conversation in a few minutes. And I think, Joe, you're up next.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat about this. And you made a number of key points. And I think the CPO survey did the same. As you know, since we've known each other a long time, and Mike and I have really, I've been in the consulting side and the product side and many sides of the procurement process. And so first, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the digital project fails. Really, I think in most cases, they take on too much. If you want to take your organization digital, break it down into pieces. And I always talk about the digital catalog, the digital PO, the digital invoice, and the digital payment. But I remind customers that I talk to, and sometimes prospects that are really looking to ask me how to set the project up right, don't forget the supplier, because often by nature we think about our own employees. I also sat down with one of our customers recently who put the system live and wanted to do a 6-month checkpoint. And I asked them, what drew you to come to talking to me about moving digital? He said, Joe, I walked the company and I looked for paper. I walked into AP, I walked into procurement, I walked into even our plant where we do receiving, and there was just so much paper. And he said he read in an article from one of the analysts that US-based invoices can be as much as $15 each, sometimes more. And he just started totaling that. And he said that there wasn't a product on the planet that was more expensive than what he came up with just from the paper that he found. So he had his ROI basis to go to the executives. So the other thing that happens, and I think one of my other customers highlighted this to me once, is focus too much on digitizing the existing process. And if you break the project down into pieces, phases, you can be more successful. And you can also think about the processes you have and the processes you should keep. Sometimes the employees who are going to deploy a digital project think a lot about getting the product live rather than getting the product to help the process. And just getting a product that you may buy 1, 2, 3 tools to solve the full procure to pay solution, but just turning the system on is not the appropriate way to succeed, and it will lead to failure. Sure, picking the wrong technology really puts you back. So we had a customer who was really interested in moving forward with digital invoices. And when I got into a long conversation with them, they were both international and US. So since I've worked in the international space a lot, we were talking about compliance in Europe and CTC systems, but also in the US, how to move to digital. And they kept bringing up the scanning tool that they had and how it could play a role and how they could integrate the scanning tool. So I laid out a map on how they'll be able to turn off their scanning tool, but not initially, right? You want to pick a technology set that can handle where you're at today, but have a transition plan to digital. So some projects fail because they try to move everything to digital day one. I think differently about this. I think you need to have technology that can adapt to where you are. For example, onboard maybe 20% of your suppliers to digital POs, digital invoices. Leave the rest as paper, but have a plan on migrating those to digital over time so that you make sure that you don't hamstring the project or put too much pressure on the project. And then not enough about the people. Really, if we emptied our buildings, there's nothing that gets done. We learned that, unfortunately, through COVID. For companies that had to move quickly to get their employees home, they started to realize the breakdown in the back office system. We had a customer that called and said, Joe, the fact that your application morphs from a laptop to a cell phone through the web app and through cloud, we were actually running our business off our mobile phones relative to purchasing. And it was because we'd become digital before. So in some of these customer stories, an application that'll follow the employee where they want to work or where they need to work tends to turn into a safety lever when you run into crisis like COVID. And now 70% of employees are working remote or moving, even if they're in a manufacturing plant, they're moving around. So applications need to be able to adapt. So that's my last piece on the digital project failure pieces. Focus on the number one key aspect of procure to pay, adoption. You need to have an application that's designed for procurement, but primarily designed for end users, so that the adoption takes, so you get the spend under management, so you get the contract savings achieved. And relative to invoicing, it can handle all different types of invoices. Again, don't forget the supplier. Not all suppliers are going to be able to send a CXML invoice day one. So have a system set that you choose that can handle the big suppliers that are going to do punch out and CXML invoices. The medium size that might be able to do punch out, but they're going to type in the invoice into a supplier portal. And the little suppliers that may receive their PO through the portal and do a PO flip. But definitely team up with your suppliers and put them with you and with your team on the journey to move through digital. You'll really benefit and mitigate some of the risks. So Mike, why don't you go to the next slide?
Sure.
And there's another aspect of being plugged in, but being disconnected. So a lot of people who do a digital project in procure to pay think about suppliers last, or try to force suppliers to do things that are unnatural. Only 25% of suppliers are electronic, and you can find those by just sorting your spend by total number of POs, total number of invoices, total number of spend, total dollars. The ones at the top are going to be the ones that are highly digital. They have an e-business solution. They've integrated before. And to be honest with you, I work with Grainger and B&H Photo a lot. They're two really strong suppliers. They help our customers and our prospects. Often when a customer signs and they want to use Grainger or B&H Photo, I'll suggest their first call be with the supplier, because these suppliers have done hundreds, if not thousands, of connections, and they know everything that their buyer is going to run into. Plus, they want to provide that additional service. Suppliers save also. So by being electronic, they're benefiting. A PO that comes in fully electronic from a catalog, I was told once, is $1 for a supplier. And one that comes in that's faxed in or called in is $10, $15. So suppliers save too, but not all suppliers are at the same place in the life cycle. Like Jason talked about, the maturity curve. So approach your supply base with a supplier segmentation. Realize that only a certain number of them are digital and take advantage of that. And even if you're not ready to do full electronic invoicing, set up the 20% of suppliers that are electronic for punch out. Set them up for e-invoicing and use your procure to pay to start doing electronic invoices with those. And any supplier that's willing to take POs on the portal and do PO flip. Then segment the other suppliers over a long-term roadmap. Engage with the suppliers, figure out what they need, but also make it a criteria in the contract that you really expect them to be able to move to some level of digital over a 3-year period. Give them a chance to serve you right, but take them for where they're at. And in that case, sometimes emailed PDFs or emailed invoices need to suffice in the short run, or guiding them through how to use the portal for PO flip. These kind of things will reduce the number of exceptions. So the second thing that executive told me who selected the solution was he didn't only walk around with paper, he walked around and looked for exceptions. So he was an SAP customer. He looked for block and hold report. He pulled that over a 6-month period and started looking and analyzing why were these block and holds caused? Why were the exceptions caused? And the number of resources in AP. So if you tackle procurement and AP at the same time, you can actually provide benefit to both groups. And then define in your company the opportunity to start with a measure of today and then drive towards an increased measure. So straight through processing is a great measure because it's an outcome measure. So is percent digital. So go back in your company and find percent digital POs, percent digital invoices. And I would strongly suggest percentage of invoices that are non-PO. Use that as a benchmark for day one because your ROI is going to be based heavily on that. You can also, if you want to dive into payment, percentage on check. You may have a failed or struggling ACH, check to ACH process. And if you benchmark on some of these percentages, you can then measure success over time and then correlate a cost to those savings. I would also say that because suppliers struggle to connect, sometimes it's them, sometimes it might be something in your back office or a bit of both, the supplier inquiries go up quite significantly, not just for you, but for suppliers. And simply putting in the right solution, not only being kind of plugged into a procure-to-pay solution, but designing it to connect to the suppliers can drastically reduce. Of all the projects I've been on, 2 or 3 actually came to me and said, Joe, it was a 3-year journey, but afterwards we turned off our supplier 800 number. They didn't need it. They could find payment status by going to the portal or just looking at the status we sent digitally. So think about a long-term goal of turning off that supplier inquiry call or making sure that it's focused on the right kinds of issues. Mike, why don't we go ahead to the next slide? Sure. So when we talk about operational efficiency, I think the CPO survey and some of the things Jason mentioned were critical around operational efficiency. You want control visibility, but you also want speed and agility. And when you think about speed and agility, those 2 words really translate into this digital connected component. It doesn't help to try control and visibility if nobody's going to use the system. And that's why I say adoption is the #1 thing. In the 25 years I've worked in procurement, the #1 challenge for our customers and for people in the procurement space is achieving that adoption. And it's not just one thing that's going to solve that. Speed and agility is about talking to your employees, helping them understand the value, having a system that's easy to use and follows you where you need to work. Focuses on a digital catalog, which is contract-based. Focuses on a digital PO that's based on workflow approval. So pre-spend approval is a lot less expensive than post-spend expenses, or God forbid, a non-PO invoice. So if you really think about speed and agility, employees don't want to live in the back office systems, but they want to get in and get out. And I had one big customer come to me and say, Joe, I would kick you out of our company right now if it wasn't for our employees. And I said, what do you mean? He was being a little bit challenging me a little bit. And he said, my employees love your system. And your system pays for itself over and over again. And he said, the only reason why I said that is because I'm already paying for a financial system, an ERP system, and I'd rather have it do it. But ultimately, the end user has to buy, they have to submit, and they have to use. And he said their employees not only submit tickets to be able to request items, but they submit tickets to be able to use your application. So adoption is key. And in AP, you're always going to have a bit of a messy situation in AP just by the nature of AP over time, but automating the ability, for example, instead of an employee in AP picking up the phone and calling and trying to find the non-PO business owner, they can actually workflow it through the system to the business user and get them to not only code it, which makes it cheaper on the AP side, but also they can check and make sure that they got what they want. Things like speed and agility are three-way match. Three-way match is key to straight-through processing, because you can make sure that you got what you ordered by receiving and that you paid for what you got by matching the invoice to the goods you see. So speed and agility are key. Again, break the project into pieces so you can achieve it. So Mike, maybe the next slide would be good.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of the things that challenge speed and agility is some of the fundamental business that you're running into today will slow you down. And it's no criticism, it's just the reality. Currently, you will have a process in place. one thing that's really important for everybody to realize in this space is the company is buying somehow and managing invoices somehow today. But those existing processes, such as one-off workflow solutions or requirements relative to coding, some certain standard operating procedures that weren't designed for digital, things around data maintenance that cause manual processes. So employees have to request a report to see spend. And moving data around so that it can be into one major system can sometimes fight against the process of real-time integration, which is key. And then offline tracking, interesting enough, there's a lot of companies that run into the situation where the full procure-to-pay solution and catalog aren't all in one system that's connected, or a couple systems that are connected. So they have to do offline tracking and keep systems up to date, like adding a inventory code back into a purchase order because they want the reporting to have it. So key thing on control and visibility when you're trying to get the agility and speed is to focus on some of your business processes are going to need to change, and there will be a transformation of your existing systems that is natural, and that's why over time it's important. So maybe Mike, the next slide.
Yeah.
So how do you solve this? You have a modern mobile and agile solution in one way, shape, or form. And when I say mobile, I mean something that will follow the workforce where they want to work and where they need to work, and more recently where they need to work, because the application is an end user application to drive spend under management. And even in the AP space, how many people have run into trouble in the last 9 months with people having to go into the office just to pick up invoices or payments, right? So having it fully digital so that it can transfer or be accessible via the cloud, doesn't necessarily have to be mobile. Some employees transfer from their desk to a mobile device, provides the agility and speed. So a simple procure-to-pay solution that focuses on the end user first is key. Breaking down procurement, invoice, and payment into its pieces and laying out a project over time is critical. Focusing on the people and providing live data, a system that ultimately in the end, once you're live, an employee can go in and real time see their orders, or a division head can real time see the orders for their area, or the invoices that happen to be maybe held up are key. Accelerate automation. So as opposed to being brought into systems that are going to accelerate managing paper, eliminate the paper. Now you're going to be dealing with paper purchase requisitions, or God forbid, one of our customers told us that they had a spreadsheet for purchase requisitions and they had 9 people taking emailed attached purchase requisition spreadsheets and typing it into the financial system. We even had someone in the auto industry where they were FedExing around requests. And it's just the process they had. Nobody really realized it's $17 per purchase requisition, and some things in the list weren't even $17. So the ability to rethink accelerating automation, not making it necessarily faster, but making it more digital and smarter by moving to a cloud-based solution, focusing on areas that you may be doing now that could be automated or simplified. And then data accuracy and insight. At least in one way, shape, or form, make sure that the system you have for procure to pay and the processes generate real-time accurate data for use real-time by the employees. This agility means an employee needs to be able to not just execute a request, but see a status or do reports. And so having disparate systems where you can't ultimately come back and have data accuracy is key. And I'll provide one good example based on my years of experience. And sometimes when Jason and I have a beer and we're talking over some of the pain points, a good example is, for very efficient reasons, paper-based invoicing often types the header because that's all that needs to be paid. But you cannot do spend analytics on header-typed invoice, especially non-PO invoices, because you need the line level to really analyze the categories, commodities, spend, and price. And so what ends up efficient in an AP process, that is, let's just type the header, it saves time, ultimately hurts the business because it's not real time. So by moving to a digital PO, allowing a supplier to digitally invoice, you automatically get that line level, you get the goods receipt, and you're able to do detailed data accuracy real time based on the information that's come through. So Mike, let me stop there. That's really what I wanted to cover in my areas, and I appreciate the chance to cover that.
Yeah, no, it's great, both of you. I once again, I learned from both of you, and I have lots of notes here to go on, so really do appreciate that.
Sure.
Second thing I just want to stress right now for the audience, please give us questions, comments, and experiences. Doesn't just have to be a question for us. You can certainly share your experiences too. And Jason, actually, I wrote down the point you made that the more I do, I find the less I know, and that's very true. So thanks for the learning opportunity. So one of the things that you both talked about was procurement maturity, right? And Jason, you had the different levels, and I think we have different levels of maturity on the call today. Some of the questions that came in early were about starting point. So let me share a question here. Somebody asked about the starting point. So a little bit of context is that they have an ERP system now. They're not getting the compliance they need and want. So as you go down the digitalization path, is there a recommended priority on where to start or what needs to be in place before other steps are taken? So I guess really asking what's the starting point, and from their perspective, having an ERP without compliance is their starting point.
Great, Jason, you want to hit that one first?
Sure. I mean, I would probably take a step back and say, well, what are the overall goals, near-term goals of procurement kind of at this point in time? If it is automation and digitization, finding a way to engage the business through transactional procurement, through transactional processing in a manner that makes everybody's lives easier, provides better data, is a great place to start. If the burning platform is you can't get supply right now, as is happening in different industries, supplier discovery and sourcing might be a better place to start, or analytics. But if ERP and improving the environment in terms of visibility and processing and data and overall efficiency is the main goal, in that case, starting with what we might call procure to pay at Spend Matters, others call it the same thing, but really the combination of e-procurement and AP automation really is a fantastic place. But again, it depends on what that burning platform is.
That's a great point, Jason. I'll add to that there's a couple different approaches when you're running into a situation that you're describing with the ERP. One, you always want to use solutions that enhance your investment in your ERP. And there are a lot of complementary ones, and you want those to integrate. But you may go down a path of saying the first step I want to do is going to generate enough ROI to pay for the rest of the project. That's a very reasonable thing to do. So you pick out the most painful area. It might be adoption. So your end users aren't going in, or your procurement team is spending too much time dealing with purchase requisitions via email, et cetera. Pick one of your major problems, pick out some of your top suppliers and set a project plan for that. And let the ROI then generate the benefit for the rest. So going after a procurement area, onboarding suppliers, doing digital catalogs that are based on contracts, you'll get your contract savings adoption, and an experience, possibly a solution that adds onto your financial system, which is a really pleasant experience for the employees, will drive that adoption, and that'll drive the spend savings. So after a year, you collect all your spend savings from the previous year, and you start then funding the next piece. Secondarily, you might go after a pure process problem that is going to have ROI, but it's just purely the endpoint, and it's the way to get the base system in. So you might go after AP, and you might say, well, AP is a good driver for getting suppliers on. We'll get them digitally capable of doing invoicing. We'll drop our cost for paper invoicing and increase the quality of our data. And then we'll start doing spend analytics based on that data to make sure that we can then look for additional savings. So really it comes down to establish an initial project to identify what problems you're trying to solve, where the key value is, and then determine what the strategy is. But I always suggest a 3 to 5 year plan so you can have multiple phases. Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, no, great comment. And when I often see ERP, I always immediately think of a user adoption problem, right? So some of those are pretty tough for your casual user who's never been really trained on that. So in fact, one of the questions here, because I think they're targeting that particular problem, is that have you seen any techniques like gamification that help drive adoption? Anything like badges for using preferred suppliers, or money saved for the user? Are there any things that, what are, I guess, some practices people are using to encourage adoption?
I have actually seen that. Maybe I'll go first on this one, Jason. I've seen a couple examples of gamification. And a lot of times in business, gamification can be based on change management to get people to start using the system. So you can do, kind of a hunt for a scavenger hunt kind of project for a department where you give them a list of categories, commodities, services, or goods, and you have them have a little bit of a project for a month where they get an award or get some recognition for the employee that was able to complete the scavenger hunt. That way everyone's successful. But I've also seen gamification relative to ongoing. So Often procurement is in a position where their customer is the department that's doing the buying. And a way to kind of use a gamification concept is to provide back some of the group savings. So either there's a group CFO or there's a controller, and you establish that spend under management is a key goal. You want to drive adoption. Your goal is to achieve extra savings of X. You'll give back a certain percentage to that business unit based on achieving. That way you get the leadership in place, and you can even establish a little bit of a bonus program to the business or some kind of end of year activity. So I've seen both, some with in context of kind of appropriate business behavior as far as internal credits, others in just change management to just drive users to get familiar with the system and then enjoy the fact that they had a bit of a scavenger hunt.
I can chime in as well. I mean, there's different levels of gamification and different audiences for it. I'd even back up and say, procurement, especially in larger organizations, but if you have bandwidth in smaller ones, needs to think a bit like a marketing agency, right? You are a service provider to the business, you're a service provider to suppliers. And that, if you adopt those terms and language, everything goes better. And part of being a service provider is marketing, right? You need to market to them. And gamification is one level, of marketing in terms of highlighting who is doing right. You could have, different suppliers of the month. You could have, different employees, or even a ranking of employees, doing the right thing or who changed their behavior as a result. But even more broadly than gamification, just think about marketing, right? You got to market to everyone. And even doing kind of a teaching moment to everyone in procurement around, listen, you're in the middle of this complex world outside and this complex world inside. And even if you have to give bad news, right? We're extending payment terms, whatever that news is, there's ways to do it nicely. We were engaging with a company recently on a tech strategy, and the procurement org, and it's my client, the procurement org, was hammering us on a bunch of kind of MSA type issues, and as a supplier, it's give and take, right? But throughout the context of that discussion, they thanked us for being a partner, and that didn't feel hollow, right? Is that gamification? No. But thanking people in the business for doing the right thing, thanking suppliers for being a partner, that language matters at the end of the day too.
That's a great point, Jason. I'll just add, given the theme of the fireside chat here, you sparked another point. Some of the key measures that you're going to set up for your digital project that you may already have can be used for gamification. So percentage digital, percentage spend under management, percentage straight through processing, because sometimes it's easier for an employee or a department to do the same old process, go to a website, place an order, not realize the downstream effect, or call a supplier and not realize the downstream effect. So applying your major percentages, measures or metrics for savings or benefit to each group, and having a little bit of a loose competition between the departments based on those percentages can make it a lot of fun. Nobody gets hurt, and it also can emphasize just a little nudge of the employee. Hey, rather than jump into a supplier's website and getting what you want at your desk, how about you buy off the compliance pricing, get a digital invoice, and allow the company to be able to have that data in the system rather than lost in an e-commerce site. So think about that also.
Yeah, and let me just introduce another topic. You both talked about suppliers. That's another. In fact, Joe, you said there's some of the people that we have to enable and adopt. So there's actually some questions on here. How do you get them to adopt? So how do you get them in the game, I guess, so to speak?
Well, let me roll on this. I know Jason will have some really good thoughts on this too, but first, I always suggest you go after the largest suppliers, because often they know how to do this better than you do, or better than your company as a whole does, because they've done it thousands of times. And they always want to keep your business, grow their business, and be able to serve you well. So I would engage with your top 5, 10, 15 suppliers right out of the gate and work them first. You'll get some advice from them on how to help the other suppliers. And then second is, sometimes it comes down to change management for the suppliers, and also providing the right tools and technology based on what they're capable of doing today. So one supplier who's mailing in paper invoices might be able to be invited to supplier portal. They might appreciate that because they get digital orders that are really accurate. They don't have to deal with paper or faxed orders. And then they can PO flip. So you get the digital invoice, and they actually get the speed and ease. Digital portals have the ability for them to also check status on payment et cetera. They can even do change orders and ship notices. So I would suggest strongly that you segment your suppliers into the most sophisticated. Do those first, you'll get learnings. Then your middle class ones that can do, maybe they can provide digital PO, they can do the portal, but maybe they don't have a digital catalog quite yet. And then maybe the ones that are on the lower end, or your long tail, or might be a result of spot buy, you'd be able to then have them go to your portal, do a little bit more change management, and have them manage across the board. Maybe they send you a digital catalog that you load yourself. So the key with suppliers is segment them into what they're capable of today and set them on a roadmap towards what you need them to do.
Excellent. I do want to, there's actually a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to pick them actually, which is great. One of the ones that just caught my eye here is that, again, almost a getting started type question. So they're saying there's actually agreement that starting with the MVP and scaling that is a good way to go, good approach. But they're still asking, like, you know, is there experiences that you can share? Maybe they just want to hear how others have gotten started or something to that effect, if you have that.
Sure. Jason, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I guess as it pertains to a deployment, it completely depends on what kind of product you're trying to implement. Mm-hmm. I tend to think, and Joe might completely disagree with me, which is fine. We could both be equally right or equally wrong. You know, for procure to pay implementations, there really is not an MVP approach. There's a go live approach. And yes, you can scale it over time, but you really need to hit a certain level of integration, a certain level of onboarded suppliers and catalogs and the like. Or from an AP perspective, you know, you really need to, you know, define a go live, which encompasses, you know, the target amount and type of invoices, which will be significant. I think if you're talking about other areas like sourcing or contract management or even supplier management, you might take a more phased kind of MVP approach to it, much easier in lots of cases. You know, from a sourcing perspective, you know, you could say we're going to touch, you know, 20% of our strategic spend around sourcing events. From a compliance perspective, you could say, you know, we really want to think about the cyber risk of our top 20 services or IT suppliers. But I think for P2P, an MVP approach probably isn't the best way to go. I think you really need to think about go live and incremental, you know, rollout and improvement from go live.
I agree with you, Jason. In a lot of the time that I did consulting delivery, it started off with kind of an enterprise mentality. And I think you're exactly right. I think you have to focus on go live, but there are some scope and segmentation aspects that I've learned over time make it easier and drives early success and builds momentum towards broader use. For example, pick a few experienced suppliers, pick a few manageable commodities, a couple goods, a couple services. Pick the integration into your financial system carefully. Like you might just start with invoice, you know, post approved invoices. Make sure you get the digital catalog experience. Make sure that the initial department that you have, start with one department or one unit, is prepared and has the change management. And then identify a few employees that are going to be through the whole life cycle. Even if procurement has to hire a champion, some change management agent that everybody gets to know, great project manager, excited for the project, that will be through the life cycle. So you get the full procure to pay live or purchase and invoice live, and you just reduce the amount of scope by suppliers. But for the ones that you do orders, do the invoice. And what you'll get is a phase one project where you've gained all the experience. You've got that employee now who really has gotten on board. They've got the change management tuned in. You've also gotten feedback from the business on if there's existing processes that need to change more than planned. And then lay a rollout plan for the larger rollout. But I agree with Jason. I would go ahead and get the purchasing. And in my case, I would do purchase, invoice, and pay, starting with purchase and invoice, and start rolling it out with a set number of users, set number of suppliers, and get the process ironed out.
All right. So I'm looking around and struggling a little bit. So we're running up against time. So I do want to do one more question for you. I was
Great.
just struggling which one to pick. So what I think I'll do, for those that did submit questions, thank you very much. We will get answers to you. We'll get these questions answered. We'll get them out, and so you have the answers and feedback. So I want to make sure that that's rewarded for you doing that. So let me look at. There's one in front of me that would be a nice one to end on. So they're talking about the 80-20 rule. And their feeling is that 80% can be digitalized, but the feeling is 20% probably could not be digitalized. And I guess first of all, I'll kind of add: do we think that's true? Can you digitalize 100%? Is that possible? But if not, then how do you account and manage the 20%?
Yeah, that's great. Jason, maybe I'll go first on this one, just kind of trading back and forth. I'm a realist because, I've been in the consulting, delivery, product side of procure to pay, all the way source to pay, including risk management. And it's a life cycle. There's a journey you're going on. And I think an 80-20 rule is going to apply during certain parts of the journey. But if you think about the reason why the 20% stay in the non-digital format, you will find that based on the products and solutions you come up with and processes you come up with, you'll be able to handle all of those. You just have to pick the right approach at being able to handle that. And that's why I say you start your project where you can handle all suppliers where they're at, because what you'll do is you'll have an initial process for handling the ones that aren't as sophisticated. The idea that the company is a living organism and you're going to be switching vendors all the time, you're going to have different needs of the company, and there's going to be urgent aspects, is always going to bring in a little bit more manual. But because you're going to go after that 80% and get those digital, you're going to free up resources to be more strategic and more reactive. So the AP staff is going to scale better. You're going to have people that can engage when there's something special that has to be bought. Or God forbid we have the situation like COVID where there's a supply chain disruption in one area, they can redirect their energy towards that space. So I'm a believer that the 20%'s pretty much always going to be there, but you can work on why it's there and come up with a digital strategy on how to handle it differently than maybe the large suppliers, the large spend. And I think ultimately you can design your systems and your people to be able to handle that as a plan. Back to you, Jason.
Yeah, in terms of thinking about the Pareto principle as kind of applied to tech deployment and capturing all spend, whatever metric you want, I don't think it's binary in terms of that, 20%, which you may not fully capture. I think if you're flagging exceptions via a system and you're resolving and collaborating via the system internally with suppliers, you can tick the box as you've applied, process rigor that will capture the opportunity in the future to drive straight through processing and automation, because you've captured the interaction in a tool set versus via email or Excel or even Skype or Slack. So I wouldn't let the good be the enemy of the great here. I would strive for 100% with a loose definition of what that final 20% is, as long as you can capture and learn from the exceptions you have to manage that you will encounter.
Yeah, and I've seen customers that have gotten 100% of the suppliers to receive POs digitally and send in invoices digitally, but they had a mandate that the ones that weren't quite sophisticated had to use the supplier portal. And so you can also set some policies and procedures as you dissect that 20%. And over time, you can bring them into some process that maybe they're not digital, but by the time it hits your employees, you're digital. You can also adapt to some suppliers for catalog. You can make the catalog for them. As long as it's based on contracted price, then your experience is digital, even though they may not quite be digital. So I wouldn't shy away from analyzing how you can take care of the 20% once you've achieved the 80%.
That's excellent. And I apologize for cutting it off here because I'm actually glued and still taking notes. In fact, Jason, I want to ask you, because you said I'd rather be in procurement than finance. I was definitely going to ask you about that too. So I'm sure we scared some finance people today.
I'd rather be in both.
So
I think merging them would be a good thing.
So in terms of follow-up, please feel free to follow up with us. We are going to get you the recording. Anybody that registered will have access to the recording and the slides as well. And then I put some resources from our website, vroozi.com/resources. Lots of good papers on procurement and finance, things that both departments, organizations are struggling with, and how digital makes that better. And if there's something not on this list and that you can't find, please feel free to email me, mike.judd@vroozi.com. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. Jason and Joe, thanks for the great comments and conversation. Always a pleasure. And like I said, I'm always learning, so thank you for my notes too.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jason.
Right.
Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
Joe.
All right,
Have
bye
a
now.
great day.
You too.